In this video, I will be discussing the ethical issues with death and trauma reporting. However, I will be looking specifically at violence against women. According to the End Violence Against Women Coalition, there was a recorded 141 female murders in the UK in 2021. Most of these cases will have received little to no media attention for many different reasons. However, there are many ethical concerns around the cases that are reported. Generally, in death and trauma reporting, this has to be handled sensitively and authentically. It must also be reported in a manner that personalises the story to the family and avoids making a stereotype out of the bereaved. When it comes to trauma reporting, two important things to remember is context and consent. Context, firstly, is to contribute to the public understanding of a specific event involving death and trauma or grief, while portraying an authentic account of what happened and the impact it has had. Consent is what allows for the family or those in mourning to be involved in how the victim is presented within their story and how much information can actually be shared with the public sphere. A combination of these two things sets boundaries and spreads control equally between the reporter and the interviewee. However, reporting violence against women carries more ethical issues than just context, consent, and stereotyping. How the media frame these stories is important and is often the issue at hand, whether that be trying to pass blame onto the victim by trying to give reason to their attack, for example, that they have drank too much, were dressed provocatively, were known to have infidelity issues, or act in a promiscuous manner. Framing the story to suggest the victim is to blame is incredibly unethical. Another ethical issue that arises when reporting violence against women is when stories try to speculate a reason for the perpetrator's actions. For example, the prospect of divorce causing a man to murder his own wife. Providing justification for the behaviour is not only unethical but reflects acceptance that men or any perpetrators can be excused of blame with a good enough reason. To discuss these ethical issues in closer detail, I have chosen 3 cases to look at that have all occurred fairly recently. The case is going to be looking at the media coverage of the murder of Grace Milani, who was strangled to death during sex by Jesse Kempson, who she met through Tinder. With this case, Milani's sex life became the spectacle of most stories by discussing her apparent interest in BDSM, and this was a factor in her death. Many large publishers, such as the New York Post, written, "Killed backpacker Grace Milani was into choking, BDSM, and court evidence." Or the London Evening Standard, who wrote, "Grace Milani was member of BDSM dating sites and asked ex-partner to choke her during sex court hearings." Or worst of all, the Daily Mail, who published, "Grace Milani's killer told police that she asked him to choke her during sex because she's a fan of the 50 Shades of Grey film." The second ethical issue that arose from this case was the UK media publishing the killer's name while there was a name suppression order in place in New Zealand, which can inherently harm the trial in its progression. The second case that had underlying ethical issues was the murder of Sarah Everard, a woman who was raped and murdered after trusting an off-duty police officer. In the aftermath of her death, there were many discussions within the media that Everard was not streetwise enough or didn't know enough about the legal process to spot that her killer was arresting her for illegitimate reasons. The third and final case is the murder of Sabina Nessa, a primary school teacher who was brutally murdered in southeast London by a man named Kosey Selimaj. However, the ethical issues surrounding this case differ from the previous two. Here we don't see the victim blaming or accusatory behaviour, but delays in the reporting of her murder. With her murder occurring on the Friday and it only really reaching the news the following Wednesday, with sites like Save Lives posting tributes and news about her death before it even reached headline news. The reportage in general response comparatively to the other cases around the same time lack the same public response. It begs the question why a woman of colour who was murdered received less media attention than a white woman who was murdered only a few months prior. Between these 3 cases, it's easy to see that the media does not always report ethically on news involving violence against women, something that should be given more attention to help stop victim blaming and support ending violence against women.